It was a quiet evening in a small, peaceful town, and the sun had just disappeared behind the distant hills, leaving the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. Inside a cozy little house, Sarah and Daniel were sitting in their living room, holding their newborn baby, Emma, in their arms. The tiny baby was asleep, her small chest rising and falling gently, and the room was filled with the soft sound of her breathing. Sarah looked at her husband with a warm smile, feeling the deep love and joy that only a parent could know. Daniel kissed Emma's forehead softly, whispering how perfect and precious she was, and Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with tears of happiness. Everything seemed calm, safe, and normal, and yet something in the air felt slightly off, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the front door, and it was unusual because it was late and they were not expecting anyone. Daniel frowned, unsure who could be visiting at this hour, and Sarah hesitated, feeling a strange shiver run down her spine. When Daniel opened the door, he was shocked to see a boy standing there, no older than 12, wearing simple clothes that looked slightly worn and dusty. The boy's eyes were deep and serious, almost too old for his face, and there was a strange intensity in the way he looked at Daniel and Sarah. He did not smile or say hello. He just stood there, his small frame almost trembling, but his expression strangely determined. Daniel bent down slightly and asked gently, "Are you okay, son? Do you need help?" And the boy took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. Then, in a voice that was calm but carried an odd weight, the boy said, "Your baby is going to perish at midnight." The word struck Sarah and Daniel like a lightning bolt, their hearts skipping a beat, and for a moment, neither of them could speak. Sarah gasped, clutching Emma tightly against her chest, feeling a cold fear creep in her body. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he tried to make sense of the boy's words, thinking it must be some kind of sick joke or a misunderstanding. But there was something in the boy's eyes, something so real and urgent, that Daniel could not dismiss him entirely. He noticed a faint scar on the boy's hand and a small cut on his cheek, signs that this child had been through something unusual. The boy continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "You have very little time, and you must not ignore this warning." Sarah looked at him, her mind racing with questions. "Who are you? How do you know about our baby?" she asked nervously. The boy did not answer directly. He only shook his head slightly and stepped back, glancing at the sky as if checking the time. A chill ran through the room as the wind outside picked up, making the trees sway and the leaves rustle against the windows. Daniel wanted to close the door and shut this strange encounter behind him, but something deep inside told him to listen carefully. The boy's expression was too serious, too urgent to be a lie, and it seemed as if he carried knowledge beyond his years. Before Daniel could ask more questions, the boy turned and began walking down the street, disappearing quickly into the shadows. It was as if he vanished into thin air, leaving the family staring at the empty road, their hearts still pounding and their minds filled with fear. Sarah whispered, "Daniel, what if it's true? What if something really happens to Emma?" And Daniel swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. He felt a mix of anger and helplessness, wishing he could have asked more, wished he could have understood why the boy came. But all he could do was look out the window, seeing only the empty street and the distant glow of the streetlights. Inside, Emma slept peacefully, unaware of the fear surrounding her, and her parents held her tighter, vowing silently to protect her no matter what. Minutes passed, yet the feeling of unease did not fade, and every creak in the house or gust of wind outside made them jump. Daniel checked the locks on all the doors and windows, and Sarah paced the room, her mind spinning with every possibility. They tried to rationalize the situation, thinking the boy must have been lost, or confused, or simply a mischievous child. But deep down, a small voice of doubt whispered that this was no ordinary warning, that something about the boy's words carried truth. As the night grew darker and the clock ticked steadily toward midnight, Sarah and Daniel found themselves unable to rest. Their minds replayed the boy's words again and again, and a heavy weight of fear and uncertainty settled over the house. By the time they finally sat down together, holding Emma in the center of their arms, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of the baby's gentle breathing. And yet, the sense of something extraordinary lingering in the night remained. They knew their lives had changed in those few moments, that a simple knock on the door had brought a warning that could not be ignored. Outside, the town continued its quiet routine, unaware of the tension inside the little house. And as the first stars appeared in the sky, Sarah and Daniel could only watch the clock and wait, feeling that their lives were about to be tested in ways they could not imagine. After the mysterious boy had disappeared into the night, Sarah and Daniel were left in a silence so heavy it almost pressed against their chests. They looked at Emma, who slept peacefully in her small crib, unaware of the fear and tension filling the room. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she wiped a tear from her cheek, and Daniel tried to steady his own breathing, wishing he could make sense of the boy's words. Could it really be true? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, and Daniel hesitated, unsure whether to answer. They both knew the words, "Your baby is going to perish at midnight," were not something ordinary, something that could be easily dismissed. The house suddenly felt colder, and shadows seemed to stretch across the walls, moving in ways that made their hearts race. Daniel walked to the window and peered out into the quiet street, seeing nothing but dim streetlights and empty sidewalks. He tried to convince himself it was just a strange coincidence, that the boy was lost or confused, but a small part of him refused to ignore the warning. Sarah joined him, clutching a small blanket tightly around her shoulders, and said, "I don't know what to do." "Daniel, what if something happens?" Her voice trembled with fear, yet there was determination in her eyes, the determination of a mother who would do anything to protect her child. Daniel nodded, feeling the same protective instinct rising in him, and they agreed to take precautions, no matter how strange or extreme they might seem. They began checking every corner of the house, locking doors and windows, moving sharp objects away, and making sure Emma's crib was in the safest possible spot. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside, made them jump and glance nervously at the clock. The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly, and the weight of the approaching midnight pressed on their minds like a heavy stone. Sarah sat near Emma, humming softly to calm both the baby and herself, while Daniel paced the room, unable to sit still. He tried to think logically, to plan for any possible danger, but nothing made sense, and the feeling of helplessness kept creeping in. Then a small, strange sound came from the hallway, like a soft tapping, almost too faint to hear. Daniel froze, listening carefully, and Sarah held her breath, clutching Emma tighter. They exchanged a glance, both wondering if the boy's warning had somehow caused this, if the strange energy he carried lingered in the house. The clock ticked closer to midnight, each second amplifying their anxiety, and the ordinary world outside felt distant and unreal. Even the baby seemed to sense the tension, her small face twitching as if she were dreaming of something important. Daniel remembered the boy's intense eyes, the way he had looked directly at them, and a shiver ran down his spine. He couldn't explain why, but he felt the boy's warning was not just a threat, it was a plea, a guide to help them survive the night. Sarah noticed Daniel's tense expression and whispered, "Maybe he knew something we don't, something we can't see yet." They both realized they needed to stay alert, to watch and wait, because the danger might be real, and they had only hours, only minutes to protect Emma. Hours passed slowly, and small, unexplainable events began to occur. The lights flickered for a moment, casting the room in eerie shadows, and a soft thump came from the attic. Daniel's heart raced, and Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the baby monitor. The tension was unbearable, but neither of them left Emma's side, feeling the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. They whispered reassurances to each other, trying to calm their own fears, but deep down, they both knew that this night would change their lives forever. As midnight approached, a strange sense of urgency filled the house. Every second felt like a minute, and every minute felt like an hour. They remembered the boy's words again and again. Your baby is going to perish at midnight, and the warning burned in their minds. Sarah and Daniel held Emma together, hearts pounding, eyes scanning the room, waiting, fearing, and hoping. They didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. They would do everything in their power to protect her, no matter what. The night grew darker, and the small house seemed to shrink under the weight of fear and uncertainty. Sarah and Daniel remained close to Emma, their eyes constantly flicking toward every shadow, every sound, every corner of the room. The strange warning from the boy echoed in their minds, repeating over and over, "Your baby is going to perish at midnight." Each tick of the clock felt louder than the last, and every second stretched into eternity. Daniel decided they needed to prepare more than just physical safety. He gathered blankets, extra pillows, and moved the crib to the center of the room, away from windows and walls. Sarah lit a few candles, their soft glow casting flickering shadows on the walls, making the house feel warmer, but somehow stranger. They double-checked locks and reinforced the doors, imagining any possible danger that might come. But as much as they tried to prepare, a sense of helplessness clung to them like a heavy fog. Then, a sudden noise startled them both, a faint scratching coming from the kitchen. Daniel froze, listening intently, while Sarah held Emma tighter, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a sound no ordinary house would make, soft but persistent, almost like someone, or something, was moving carefully but deliberately. They exchanged a tense glance, unsure whether to investigate or stay put. Fear battled with curiosity, and finally Daniel whispered, "I need to see what it is." He walked slowly toward the kitchen, every step careful, every muscle tense. The scratching stopped as he reached the doorway, leaving only silence and the faint smell of the night air slipping through the cracks of the windows. He looked around, seeing nothing unusual, no intruder, no explanation for the sound. Sarah's voice trembled behind him. "Daniel, maybe we should just stay with Emma." He nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that something invisible was watching, waiting for the right moment. Minutes passed, yet the tension didn't fade. Even the simplest sounds, a creak of the floorboard, a gust of wind against the window, made them flinch. Sarah tried to calm herself by humming softly to Emma, but her voice shook with fear. Daniel kept checking the time, realizing that midnight was only an hour away, and the boy's warning was drawing closer to its terrifying deadline. Then, a flicker of movement caught Daniel's eye, a shadow crossing the hallway outside Emma's room. He froze, heart racing, trying to tell whether it was a trick of the candlelight or something more. Sarah gasped quietly, clutching the baby's tiny hand, feeling a surge of panic. The air seemed to thicken, and a strange energy filled the room, making every hair on their bodies stand on end. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was about to happen. Daniel whispered, "We have to stay alert, no matter what." They moved closer together, creating a small protective circle around Emma. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and twist, and the scratching sound returned, louder this time, coming from the corner of the living room. Daniel's hands trembled as he picked up a flashlight, shining it toward the source of the sound. The beam revealed nothing at first, only the familiar furniture, the carpet, and Emma sleeping peacefully. Then, the most unexpected thing happened. A small toy that had been on the floor rolled slightly toward them, as if moved by an invisible hand. Sarah's eyes widened, and Daniel's mouth went dry, realizing that the events were no longer just coincidences. They remembered the boy, his warning, his serious, urgent eyes, and a shiver ran down their spines. It was clear now that the night held forces they could not understand, forces beyond explanation. Yet, in that moment, their determination grew stronger, their love for Emma shining brighter than their fear. They whispered plans to each other, deciding to stay awake, to watch, to protect, and to trust their instincts. The boy's warning had not just given them fear. It had given them purpose, a mission to defend the most precious life they had ever known. As the minutes edged closer to midnight, the family held each other tightly, ready to face whatever came next. The night was long, the shadows alive, and the air thick with tension. But Sarah and Daniel knew one thing for certain. They would not let Emma come to harm. Not now, not ever. The hours passed slowly, and the house seemed to grow smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were closing in on Sarah, Daniel, and baby Emma. Every tick of the clock became louder, every shadow more pronounced, and the sense of impending danger pressed down on them. Sarah sat near Emma's crib, her hand gently resting on the baby's tiny chest, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. Daniel paced the room, trying to think of any way to protect her, any plan that could stop what the mysterious boy had warned about. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the wind outside and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. But every sound felt amplified. Every flicker of the candle made the shadows dance in strange and unnatural ways. Sarah glanced at Daniel, her eyes wide with fear. "Do you think he was telling the truth?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel shook his head slowly, unable to answer, because deep down he feared that the boy's warning was real. The words, "Your baby is going to perish at midnight," echoed in their minds, refusing to be ignored. Suddenly, a strange sensation filled the room, a chill that made their skin crawl. The air seemed heavier, and the candles flickered violently, as if a strong, invisible wind passed through the house. A shadow moved quickly across the wall, and Sarah gasped, clutching Emma tightly. Daniel shone his flashlight in the direction of the movement, but there was nothing there, nothing that could explain what they had seen. It was as if the house itself had come alive, warning them, or testing them, in ways they could not understand. The couple realized they had to do more than just wait. Daniel grabbed blankets and pillows, stacking them around Emma's crib, creating a protective barrier. Sarah whispered prayers, her voice soft but urgent, hoping that their love and faith could shield their baby from harm. The clock ticked closer to midnight, each second making their hearts beat faster. Time had become an enemy, relentless and unforgiving, counting down to a moment they feared but could not escape. Then, a soft tapping began at the window, faint but deliberate. Daniel froze, his heart pounding, while Sarah held Emma closer, rocking her gently. The tapping grew louder, almost rhythmic, and the shadows seemed to twist around it. Daniel slowly approached the window, shining the flashlight outside. Nothing but the empty street and swaying trees appeared, yet the sensation of being watched remained. Sarah looked at Daniel, her face pale. "It's like he's here again, the boy. I can feel it," she whispered. Daniel nodded, unsure whether she meant the boy physically or the strange energy he had brought with him. The air seemed to shimmer slightly, and for a brief moment, a faint figure appeared outside, standing silently, watching the house. Daniel squinted, but before he could react, it vanished, leaving only the lingering chill. They realized the warning was not just words, it was a presence, a force guiding them and demanding their full attention. Minutes slipped by like hours, and the couple remained vigilant. Every noise, every shadow, every small creak or movement became a signal, a test of their awareness. Sarah whispered softly to Emma, "Stay with us, my little one. We won't let anything happen to you." Daniel held both Sarah and Emma, feeling a protective strength he didn't know he had. It was love and fear combined, powerful and unyielding, shaping their actions and focus. As the clock inched closer to midnight, they noticed small signs that had seemed insignificant before. A baby toy slightly moved on its own. A candle flickered even without wind, and the shadows shifted strangely across the floor. Each sign reminded them that the boy's warning was real, and that the night was far from ordinary. The couple steeled themselves, knowing that whatever happened next would demand courage, quick thinking, and unwavering love. They understood one truth above all else. Emma's life depended on them staying alert, staying strong, and staying together. And so, as the final hour approached, the family braced themselves, hearts pounding, eyes wide, senses sharp. The house seemed alive, the night electric with anticipation, and every second closer to midnight carried with it the weight of the unthinkable. They held each other tighter, ready to face whatever came, knowing that the night would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. The tension in the house had reached a nearly unbearable level, and every shadow seemed to breathe with life. Sarah and Daniel stayed close to Emma, their eyes darting across every corner, every flicker of light, every small movement. The minutes to midnight felt like hours, and the boy's warning haunted them, echoing through their minds with each heartbeat. "Your baby is going to perish at midnight," the words repeated, chilling them deeper than the night air outside. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the hallway, startling them both. Daniel's hand shook as he grabbed a flashlight, and Sarah clutched Emma so tightly that her small arms were pressed against her chest. The crash sounded like something heavy had fallen, but when Daniel shone the flashlight down the hall, nothing was there. The air felt thick, charged with energy, and the hairs on their arms stood on end. It was as if some unseen force was testing them, pushing them to the edge of fear. Daniel whispered to Sarah, "Stay here with Emma. Don't move." He moved cautiously down the hallway, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Every step echoed loudly in the still house, and his imagination filled the shadows with shapes that were not there. Sarah's heart pounded in her ears as she kept Emma close, trying to calm both herself and the baby. She whispered prayers, begging silently for a miracle, for protection, for guidance. Then another sound, softer this time, came from the attic. A low creak, like footsteps on the old wooden boards, made Daniel freeze in place. Sarah held her breath, feeling as if the very air had stopped moving. The house had become a living thing, watching, waiting, ready to reveal its secrets at the stroke of midnight. Daniel realized that whatever was about to happen could not be ignored or fought with normal means. It required courage, instinct, and love. Suddenly, a flicker of light appeared near Emma's crib, and both Sarah and Daniel gasped. The shadows shifted violently as if the room itself was alive. Daniel rushed back to Sarah, holding her and Emma tightly. They watched as a small object floated in the air, moving slowly toward Emma. Fear paralyzed them for a moment, but instinct took over, and Daniel reached out, catching the object just before it touched the crib. It was a small, ordinary toy, but it had moved in a way that defied explanation. Sarah's hands shook as she clutched Emma, realizing that the warning was real, and the night was full of forces they could not understand. The couple looked at each other, eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. They knew that the unthinkable could come at any second, and that Emma's safety depended on them being brave, alert, and unrelenting. Minutes later, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The candle flames danced wildly, casting long, terrifying shadows across the walls. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the whistle of the wind, the faint hum of the night, seemed amplified. Sarah whispered to Daniel, "It's coming. I can feel it." He nodded, gripping her hand, his jaw tight, his eyes never leaving Emma. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and a strange, almost tangible presence filled the air. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist toward the crib, and the energy in the room became almost unbearable. The couple held their breath, hearts racing, feeling time slow down. Every second brought them closer to the moment the boy had warned them about. The fear was intense, but beneath it grew a fierce protective love, stronger than any threat, stronger than any darkness. Then the clock chimed, signaling the final minutes before midnight. The tension was electric, the house trembling subtly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sarah and Daniel held Emma together, whispering assurances, their courage solidifying in the face of the unknown. The boy's warning was no longer a distant echo. It was a reality pressing down on them. And in those final moments, they realized that love, vigilance, and faith were their only weapons against the unthinkable. The final minutes before midnight felt endless, stretching time into a slow, heavy crawl. Sarah and Daniel clutched Emma tightly, their hearts pounding so loudly they feared it might wake the baby. The shadows in the room seemed to move of their own accord, twisting and stretching in ways that defied logic. Every creak of the floor, every whistle of the wind, sounded like a warning, a countdown to something they could not see. Daniel shone the flashlight around the room, scanning every corner, every piece of furniture. The light trembled slightly in his hand, not from fear alone, but from the overwhelming energy filling the house. Sarah whispered softly to Emma, "It's almost over, my little one. Stay strong." Her voice was calm, but laced with desperation, hoping that her love could shield the baby from whatever was coming. Then, the air shifted, suddenly heavy and electric, making their skin tingle and their hair stand on end. A cold breeze swept through the room, snuffing out some of the candles and leaving dancing shadows in their wake. Daniel felt a sudden urge to move Emma's crib closer to the center of the room. As he did, the shadows seemed to recoil, as if noticing his protective action. Sarah's eyes widened, realizing that whatever presence lingered in the house responded to them in strange and unpredictable ways. Suddenly, a faint whisper echoed through the room, soft and unintelligible, yet chilling. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, brushing against their ears. Emma stirred slightly, her small hands curling into fists, sensing the tension. Sarah held her closer, whispering soothing words, even as a wave of fear swept over her. Daniel's mind raced, trying to anticipate the unthinkable, to plan a way to protect his daughter. Then, a sudden flash of light filled the room, bright and blinding for a second. When their eyes adjusted, they saw it. A small, dark shape moving near the crib. It wasn't the toy that had moved before. It was something larger, something almost tangible yet undefined. The shadows seemed to bend around it, and a low hum filled the room, vibrating in their chests. Daniel froze, realizing that the moment the boy had warned about was here, and the danger was real. Sarah's voice trembled. "Daniel, it's here. What do we do?" He didn't answer, only focused on shielding Emma with his arms, feeling a strength he didn't know he had. The shape shifted closer, but just as it seemed it would touch the crib, a strange force halted it. It hovered for a moment, almost studying them, then slowly receded. The room fell eerily silent, except for their rapid breathing and the faint sound of the wind outside. Daniel looked at Sarah, eyes wide, realizing that the danger had been confronted but not fully understood. The house was still trembling slightly, as if it had witnessed something extraordinary. They both understood that the boy's warning had saved them from being caught off guard. Every second had counted, and their vigilance, love, and courage had created a protective shield around Emma. Sarah clutched the baby tightly, whispering prayers of gratitude, tears streaming down her face. Then, from the shadows, they heard a soft, almost imperceptible giggle. It was familiar, the voice of the boy, though they could not see him. He had appeared, warned them, and then vanished again, leaving only the lingering presence of his message. The unthinkable had not fully happened, yet its threat had been enough to teach them the value of vigilance. They realized that love, courage, and attention had turned fear into power, turning the night from a potential disaster into a test of strength. The clock struck midnight, a deep, resonant chime that echoed through the house. The room seemed to exhale, the heavy tension lifting slightly, shadows returning to normal shapes. Sarah and Daniel finally allowed themselves to breathe, though their hearts still raced. They looked at Emma, safe and peaceful, and knew that the unthinkable had passed, at least for now. The boy's warning had been real, the night dangerous, and their lives forever changed. Even after midnight had passed, the house felt alive with tension. Sarah and Daniel remained close to Emma, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every flicker of light. The mysterious warning from the boy lingered in their minds, not as a distant memory, but as a living, breathing presence. They could still feel the weight of the night pressing against them, heavy and unrelenting. Suddenly, a soft rustling came from the corner of the room. Daniel froze, holding Emma tightly against his chest, while Sarah pressed herself closer, her heart hammering. The air seemed colder, charged with an energy they could not explain. Then, the unthinkable began to unfold, something they had feared but could not imagine fully. A shadow rose from the floor, twisting and shifting, forming a shape that was neither solid nor completely transparent. It hovered near Emma's crib, moving slowly, deliberately, as if testing the family's courage. Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, "Daniel, it's the unthinkable, it's really happening." Daniel nodded silently, feeling a surge of fear mixed with determination, knowing they had only seconds to act. The shadow lunged toward the crib, and for a moment, everything froze. Emma stirred slightly, sensing the danger, her tiny hands reaching out as if instinctively calling for protection. Then Daniel moved instinctively, stepping between the crib and the shadow. He extended his arms, holding both Sarah and Emma close, and something extraordinary happened. The shadow hesitated, recoiling slightly, as if Daniel's courage and love had created an invisible shield. Sarah joined in, whispering prayers and declarations of protection over Emma. The shadow twisted and writhed, unable to penetrate the barrier created by their unwavering love and determination. It was as if the unthinkable itself had underestimated the strength of a parent's heart. Minutes passed like an eternity, and the presence hovered, testing, probing, but never crossing the invisible boundary. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow dissolved. The room seemed to exhale, the air growing warmer and calmer, and the weight of fear lifted slightly. Sarah sank to the floor, clutching Emma tightly, tears streaming down her face. Daniel knelt beside her, holding them both, feeling a deep sense of relief mixed with awe. They had faced the unthinkable and survived, but the experience had left them changed forever. As they caught their breath, a faint giggle echoed through the room, soft and almost childlike. It was the boy's voice, though he remained unseen, as if watching from the shadows. His warning had come at the perfect moment, guiding them, protecting them, and then vanishing like a ghost. Sarah whispered softly, "Thank you, whoever you are," and Daniel nodded, unable to speak. The lesson of the night was clear. Courage, love, and vigilance could overcome even the darkest of threats. The house grew quiet once more, but the memory of the unthinkable lingered. Every corner, every shadow, every small sound reminded them of the night's extraordinary events. They realized that life was fragile, and yet, in the face of danger, love could create a power stronger than fear. Emma slept peacefully in Sarah's arms, completely unaware of the peril she had narrowly escaped. Daniel and Sarah held her tightly, hearts full of gratitude and wonder, knowing that the boy's warning had saved her life. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the windows, bathing the room in soft golden light. The house felt warmer, safer, yet still alive with the memory of the night. Sarah and Daniel exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They had faced the unthinkable and survived, and in that survival, they had discovered a courage they never knew existed. The night had tested them, changed them, and taught them that love could triumph over fear, even in the most impossible moments. The first light of dawn crept slowly through the curtains, bathing the room in a soft, golden glow. For the first time in hours, the house felt calm, as if it had finally exhaled the tension it had held all night. Sarah sat quietly, holding Emma in her arms, feeling the warmth of the baby's tiny body and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Daniel stood nearby, exhausted but alert, his eyes still scanning the room as if expecting something unexpected to happen. The events of the night replayed in their minds, each shadow, each sound, each moment of fear now feeling surreal. The mysterious boy, his warning, the strange presence in the house. They all felt like pieces of a puzzle they were still trying to understand. Sarah whispered softly to Emma, "You're safe now, my little one. Nothing will harm you." Her voice was full of relief, but also awe at how close they had come to the unthinkable. Daniel joined her, sitting on the floor beside the crib, and held both Sarah and Emma in his arms. He traced gentle circles on Emma's tiny hands, marveling at how something so small could inspire such fierce love and courage. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing their thoughts, their fears, and the realization that their lives had changed forever. The boys' warning had been real, the night had been dangerous, but their vigilance and love had turned fear into triumph. Outside, the town began to wake, unaware of the extraordinary events that had unfolded in the small house. Birds sang their morning songs, and the wind carried the fresh scent of the new day. For Sarah and Daniel, the world had never felt so bright, so fragile, and so precious. They understood that life could change in an instant, that ordinary moments could become extraordinary tests of courage. Sarah looked at Daniel, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We made it through together," she whispered. He nodded, a small smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Yes, and we will always protect her, no matter what." The night had tested them, shaken them, and terrified them, but it had also revealed the strength within them. The unthinkable had come close, but their love had been stronger, their determination unyielding. They knew that this night would remain with them forever, a memory of fear transformed into courage and hope. Then, a faint sound reached them, a soft giggle from the hallway, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. It reminded them of the boy, the one who had warned them, the one who had vanished without explanation. Though they could not see him, they felt his presence linger, a reminder that some mysteries were meant to guide rather than be understood. Sarah smiled softly. "Maybe he's watching over us," she said, and Daniel nodded silently. The thought brought a strange comfort, knowing that someone, or something, had intervened to give them a chance. They spent the rest of the morning together, wrapped in each other's arms, cherishing every small movement, every breath of Emma, every laugh, every coo felt miraculous, and they knew that the night's events had deepened their bond. The house, once heavy with fear, now felt warm and alive with love, a testament to their courage and devotion. They realized that life was precious, fragile, and unpredictable, but also filled with extraordinary moments of hope and resilience. As the day began in earnest, Daniel and Sarah looked at each other with quiet determination. They knew that challenges would come again, but nothing could shake the strength they had discovered in themselves. Emma slept peacefully, safe in the knowledge that her parents would face anything to protect her. And in that moment, the family understood the true meaning of love, courage, and the miraculous power of staying vigilant. The night of fear had ended, but its lessons would remain forever, a story of survival, faith, and the unbreakable bond of a family.